Welcome to the third episode of the Elisa Lam re-TV documentary series. The first episode was an introduction to Elisa Lam, the notorious Hotel Cecil, or Cecil for the Americans, and an analysis of Elisa's body language in the hotel elevator CCTV footage. In the second episode, we went on a rooftop tour of Hotel Cecil with a couple of intruders and proved the alarm on the rooftop access door either isn't activated or doesn't work. We also looked in a little more detail at the CCTV footage and can clearly see Elisa is blatantly smiling, even if her face is pixelated. We looked at the LAPD press conference footage, as well as the hotel employee statements and the disputed facts. In this episode, we'll take a look at the autopsy and toxicology reports to try to understand the story they tell, along with comments from a forensic pathologist. And I was also very lucky to get a detailed report from an expert equivocal death investigator. In this case, is indeed an equivocal death. I asked both the forensic pathologist and the equivocal death investigator to help me understand the story that the autopsy and toxicology reports are telling, only providing these reports with no information on who the subject was. I didn't want the opinions to be swayed or influenced by anything but the autopsy and toxicology report. So let's first look at the comments from the forensic pathologist. Basically, the report shows a young woman with no sign of significant injury and no anatomical cause of death. The diagnosis of drowning is one of exclusion. Basically, there is no other obvious cause. The lungs aren't particularly heavy. Drowning can show remarkably little change at post-mortem. The toxicology is interesting. Lamotrigine is an anticonvulsant also used for the management of bipolar disorder. Bupropion is used less often than it used to be. It has been used as an antidepressant, as an aid to stop smoking, and in the treatment of bipolar disorder. Quetiapine is an atypical antipsychotic which is also used in the management of bipolar disorder. Venlafaxine is an antidepressant. The toxicology results don't suggest an overdose. Now let's have a little look at the report from the equivocal death investigator. The direct cause of death is given as drowning. A cause of death of drowning is often only reached through the process of elimination, when all other possible causes have been ruled out. Contributing to the death is bipolar disorder. I am confused as to why this has been given as contributing to the death unless the risk of her being in the water storage tank was heightened due to this psychological disorder or the bipolar medication she was on, i.e., was she more likely to engage in risk-taking behaviour or suicidal behaviour? Otherwise, from a purely psychological and not psychological perspective, I would not expect bipolar disorder to increase the risk of one drowning. Sometimes pathologists or doctors list key medical conditions in Part 2 of the cause of death, simply because those conditions were listed in their medical history. They should only list such conditions in Part 2 if it has definitely contributed to the direct cause of death or increased the risk of condition that led to the death. So to me, it seems that the fact that they've listed bipolar disorder as a contributing factor to the death has quite surprised the investigator. It doesn't seem like this should have been listed on the autopsy. So let's have a look at the external examination, and apologies if my pronunciation on any of these medical terms is incorrect. I have no medical knowledge. Her body had undergone moderate decomposition, which indicates her body had been in the tank for some time, possibly several days, and presumably she had already gone through the early stages of post-mortem changes, i.e. rigor mortis, alga mortis, and liver mortis. On the left knee, a round abrasion was noted. This is superficial damage to the outer layer skin when in contact with a rough surface. Rigor has been abolished. This means that the body had already been through rigor mortis and this had now dissipated. This indicates she had been dead at least 36 hours. Bearing in mind this time frame is very much dependent on several factors including the environmental temperature and body decomposition. The cold delays onset and warmth speeds it up. So what was the weather like over the period that Elisa's body was supposedly in the water tank? By British standards, it was fairly warm, with highs of up to 27 in the days leading up to her body being found, and lows of around 4 degrees Celsius. So, as I said, by British standards, it was fairly warm. Liver is not appreciated. My interpretation of this is that one would expect to see signs of liver, settling of the blood beneath the skin due to gravity. However, perhaps this was hindered either due to her being in the water tank and or her being of Asian descent and hence had a darker skin colour, and liver would therefore be harder to detect. There are no petechial hemorrhages. Petechial hemorrhages in the eyes can be a sign of asphyxiation or strangulation. The absence of these supports that she was not asphyxiated or strangled. The neck was unremarkable. This supports that there are no ligature marks or signs of manual strangulation left on the neck. There is marbling seen in the upper thighs. Marbling is a sign of decomposition. This is where the blood vessels become more visible through the skin due to the breakdown of hemoglobin post-death. Hemoglobin is what makes blood cells red. The scalp skin and hair easily sloughs. This is a sign of decomposition. Head and face is bloated with bulging eyes, another sign of decomposition. The skin shows marked wrinkling. This is consistent with being submerged in water for a period of time. Autolysis. This refers to the breakdown of tissue, which is again due to decomposition. There is no evidence of trauma, which one may expect in a violent death. Clothing. At the time of the examination, she was naked, but I'm presuming she was wearing clothing when she was found in the water tank. The clothing found had sand-like particulate attached, which suggests her clothing had been in contact with sand, possibly at a beach or an area where sand was present. It seems unlikely that she came into contact with sand within the water storage tank, so one can assume her clothing came into contact with sand prior to being in the water tank. I've had a look on Google Maps and Santa Monica Beach is fairly close to where she was staying. It's around 15 miles. Also, obviously, the roof of the hotel could possibly have had grit or sand on the roof. However, looking at the videos and pictures, you can't really tell from the footage. There was no evidence of internal injury. The internal dissection of the neck organs revealed no evidence of trauma or fractures. The hyoid bone is intact. This is a sign that she had not been strangled. Had this bone been broken, that can be indicative of a manual strangulation. Nil of significance was found with respect of the musculoskeletal system, the cardiovascular system, and the respiratory system. The parenchyma has postmortem gaseous distension and edema. This refers to gas and fluid buildup after death occurred. Okay, now this one's a bit of a tongue twister. Let's give it a go. The pulmonary vasculature is without thromboembolism. This rules out a blood clot within the lung blood vessels. Portions of tablets and capsules cannot be discerned in the stomach. I'm assuming the pathologist is stating that they could not identify anything that resembled tablets or capsules, and nil of significance was found with the liver, gallbladder, kidneys, or bladder. The genital system, cervix and vagina, does not show any evidence of trauma. Had she have been raped or violently sexually assaulted, there may have been some signs of bruising within the tissue, but on dissection there didn't appear to be any. Some people have suggested there were signs of rape based on this line in the autopsy. The anus is edematous and shows pooling of the blood in the subcutaneous tissue surrounding the orifice. However, the forensic pathologist has said this is a post-mortem change. She was found floating face up, thus, by implication, bum down. Examination of the head and central nervous system does not reveal any fractures or trauma-related or naturally occurring bleeds. Cerebral contusions are not present. This refers to the observation that there were no signs of soft tissue injury or bruising to the brain. Histologic sections. This refers to small biopsy samples taken from key organs to look under the microscope. This can provide more information of what is happening within the tissues that is not viewable or observable at a microscopic level, i.e., what can be seen by the naked eye. Toxicology. Samples were submitted for a comprehensive screen. This screen included alcohol, drugs of abuse, and prescription drugs. The samples included blood, which can identify any toxins within the blood at the time of death, and stomach contents, which can indicate if any toxins had been ingested but not yet digested at the time of death. So the opinion of the pathologist has concluded that the cause of death is drowning. They've come back with this conclusion based on the absence of other causes of death, i.e. natural disease or trauma, and also taking into account the circumstances in which this lady was found, i.e. in the water storage tank. The pathologist advises interpretation of the toxicology analysis is limited due to the level of drugs not being determined due to the limited sample availability. The police investigation did not show evidence of foul play, hence a manner of death of homicide or murder or manslaughter has seemingly been ruled out. Taking into account the full circumstances and consultation, there is little to support the manner of death as suicide. Hence, the manner of death given for this case is accident. And a little side note, an accident can be defined as an event that has happened purely by chance and where death was not the intended outcome. And my interpretation of that is they didn't have enough evidence to conclusively decide what the cause of death was. They couldn't find any signs of trauma internally or externally, and because she was found in a water tank, they have ruled the death as drowning. So the preliminary examination report shows livor mortis is fixed. This indicates that she had been dead for at least 8 to 10 hours because this is how long it takes for lividity to fix. Last known alive, this will be when she was last seen alive, the 1st of February 2013, early hours of the morning on the hotel CCTV camera. The forensic consultant's report refers to the observed external appearances of the body. Of note, it describes how the body had been recovered with the clothing and the wristwatch after being submerged in a hotel water tank for many days. Also observed, sand and small, whitish and fragile flecks of unknown material were on and throughout the clothing. Hair, fingernail, pubic hair, and sexual assault kits were collected, although I do not have the results of these kits. So the microscopic report refers to the histology samples that were taken from key organs, the lungs, the liver, kidneys, heart and thyroid. The results are that the tissue sections had autolyzed, which would have been due to decomposition, hence the histological interpretation would not have been possible. So the medical report, in the manner of death section, it appears undetermined was selected first and then crossed out before settling on accident. The manner of death will have been selected once all additional analysis, i.e. histology, toxicology, etc. had been completed. Of note, only limited blood could be obtained for toxicology analysis. I just find it extremely bizarre that her body was found exactly 4 months before this report was released. This report is dated the 18th of June. She was found on the 19th of February. However, I do appreciate that it could be due to the fact that they were completing additional tests and analysis. Just seems a little strange to me that the manner of death would be changed from could not be determined to accident. It's just seems a little bizarre. How can they come to the conclusion that it was an accident when they don't even know how she got into the water tank in the first place? How can they come to the conclusion that it was an accident if they don't even know how she died? Drowning was one of exclusion. So the page is marked medical evidence appeared to be a list of the medication found, presumably belonging to the deceased. And the laboratory analysis summary report refers to the toxicology analysis and it lists all the components that were tested for. The majority of components were negative or not detected. QNS refers to quantity not sufficient. This was the case when testing for ibuprofen and lamotrigine within the blood. The positive results were documented as bupropion metabolites. This is a breakdown product from the Wellbutrin, so it indicates she had taken it previously, but the absence of Bupropion itself indicates she had not taken it recently or acutely. She may not have been fully compliant with her medication regime, or she was due to take another dose when she died. This suggests bupropion has had no bearing on her death, given that only the metabolite was detected. Venlafaxine, this was prescribed to her, however the level could not be determined due to there being insufficient volume of blood, so it cannot be determined if the levels at the time of her death were within the therapeutic or excessive/fatal range. Lamotrigine, this was detected in the liver, this was prescribed to her, this could not be tested for within the blood due to an insufficient quantity. It is not known if it could have had an effect on her death. Of note, alcohol, drugs of abuse and other medications or controlled drugs were not detected. So the final thoughts of the equivocal death investigator. The toxicology analysis is limited due to the insufficient sample or volume of blood. However, there doesn't appear to be anything alarming detected, i.e. no alcohol, no illicit drugs and no controlled drugs. The only items detected were already prescribed to her. The Wellbutrin was unlikely to be at fatal levels due to just the metabolite being detected, and the levels of venlafaxine and lamotrigine could not be determined. Had these been at excessive or fatal levels, then that could be supportive of the manner of death being suicide or even a homicide if administered by a third party. The location where the body was found denotes that concealment was important, which indicates that this was a deliberate act. This can be the case for both murder and suicide victims, where they don't want to be found or saved. However, I find this very unusual location for a suicide. And was the descendant even aware that there was a water storage tank on the roof? My thought is that whoever is involved, be it her or a third party, they would need to have quite in-depth knowledge about the hotel and especially of the water storage container. I'm concerned about the sand particles that were found within the clothing. Has an event analysis reconstruction taken place, i.e. reconstructing the chain of events leading to her death? Where had she been? Who was she with? How did she get sand all over her clothes? Why was she on the roof? How did she get into the water storage container? Did she know about the water storage container in the first place? As I've mentioned previously, Elisa was only about 15 miles away from Santa Monica Beach. She could possibly have visited the beach either that day or at any point on her trip and would probably still have some sand on her clothes or her bag and luggage. The lack of trauma or strangulation appears to discount the possibility of violence prior to death. However, a non-violent homicide, i.e. toxicity, or drowning cannot be completely ruled out. I don't agree with the manner of death being accidental. That denotes that she happened to die in the water tank by accident. The manner of death of accident should not be brought in simply because there isn't enough evidence to support homicide or suicide, and as such, this manner of death is brought in due to the process of elimination. This is an equivocal death where I believe the act was likely intentional, so a more appropriate manner of death would be undetermined, similar to open conclusion in the UK. That way, should further evidence come to light later on down the line, the case can be reopened, re-examined, and more clearly defined as either a suicide or homicide. Did she definitely die in the water, or could she have been deceased prior to being in the water? There did not appear to be inhalation of water within the lungs according to the autopsy report. However, drowning can still occur without the inhalation of water. I have absolutely no medical knowledge myself whatsoever, so I had to get help to understand the autopsy report and the toxicology reports. But one question I did have was, did she actually drown? I haven't seen any evidence that she actually drowned, and this point that the investigator has highlighted here makes me believe even more so that she didn't drown in the water tank. But how did she die? There was no evidence of trauma, internally or externally. So, to me, I believe that she probably died by means of poisoning, and it would probably have been a drug that wouldn't be tested for in an autopsy. She could have been at risk of suicide, especially due to her bipolar disorder, and possibly, if there was a possibility she was not fully compliant with her medication, for example, completely stopping antidepressants suddenly can cause extreme withdrawal and depression. However, it appears she was more than likely to have been compliant with her medication, given that it was detected during the toxicology analysis. It might have been useful for investigators to conduct a psychological autopsy for this equivocal death to help reconstruct her suicide or homicide risk factors, as well as reconstruct the likely state of her mind at the time of her death. The manner of death should remain undetermined unless further information and evidence comes to light. Although the investigator provided me with a very detailed analysis of the autopsy report, I feel even more confused after this, and that the autopsy raises more questions than it actually answers. I don't feel that there's any evidence whatsoever that Elisa actually drowned. No signs of inhalation of water in the lungs, no signs of trauma, internally or externally, and no sign of a drug overdose. The autopsy didn't actually tell us anything, and I think that's probably the point. From the information given in the autopsy, I believe it's most likely that Elisa was poisoned with a drug that would not be tested for at autopsy. However, it is important to note that, as I've said previously, I have no medical knowledge, so this is my opinion. I believe this is the story that the autopsy is telling, if we can trust the autopsy. Anyway, that's probably enough autopsy talk for one day. I'm very grateful for the help of the forensic pathologist who took time out of their day to give me their translation of these reports, and obviously also extremely grateful to the equivocal death expert that provided me with a very detailed analysis of the autopsy and toxicology reports. I didn't provide any details to either the pathologist or the investigator about the case before they gave me their opinions, and I removed Elisa's name from the autopsy and toxicology reports in order to get an unbiased opinion on the story that these reports tell. So in the next episode, episode 4, we'll look at the timeline as the evidence available shows us, and take a look at some of the theories that were available with regards to Elisa and the strange circumstances surrounding her death. Have a look at the links below in the description for all of the other episodes of this documentary series. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please show me by giving me a thumbs up. If you want more, let me know. I welcome all comments and any opinions that you might have. And if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Peace.